wake up with the sun and struggle through the day. In every passing moment, watch a lifetime slip
All right, we're
away.
live on the podcast.
And never wonder
This will be fun. We were talking about religions and cults and culture. We didn't get to culture on the podcast, but we could talk about culture now. Since we're shooting another podcast, JC was here for the last one. We were talking about culture. You guys ever watch Terrence McKenna? You know that he talks about how culture isn't your friend. And we overlook culture today so much, and we don't think about what it does in our lives or what our role in culture is or how much it really impacts us, which is interesting because it impacts the crap out of us. Terrence McKenna says culture is not your friend, but he says it in a way cooler Terrence McKenna, like culture is not your friend. I used to think he had such a creepy voice. But culture is, if you think about the root word of the word culture, it's cult. You know, it's like nomenclature, culture. It's really your culture is your your set of cultic rituals and practices and belief systems and philosophies and ideologies that tie you to the rest of a social subgroup. That's what culture is. So when Terrence McKenna would say that culture is not your friend, I think the reason that he said that is, besides being self-evident, is because whenever you sign up for culture and you buy into a culture, what you're buying into is all of the whole set of ideals and practices and beliefs and rituals and values that culture embodies or exhibits or maintains. And we're so quick. This all came about. This all came about because on another page, somebody made a comment about a cult, and it just got me thinking: what makes something a cult? What makes something a religion? What makes something a political group? And as far as I can tell, and it's a question that I've thought about a lot, and you guys probably have too. As far as I can tell, like I don't see a lot of difference. I don't know that there's really a determination that can be made that differentiates between a religion and a cult and a philosophical group or a political party. The definition of cult is pretty generic. So it's interesting how we take words and we assign these meanings to them, or they sort of have these loaded words, like cult being a negative word. And culture is okay, but cults are bad. And so what I didn't get to earlier on the podcast with JC is that if we understand that there can be potentially a negative connotation that comes along with a cult, and we're all able to readily accept that a cult is a bad thing to be a part of, then we should view culture with that same degree of skepticism. If we don't approach cultural values with skepticism, you end up with a really unnatural set of values that results in a really unnatural set of decisions, and the whole thing just spirals out from there. Yeah, blind followers, Lyndon. That's exactly right. Blind followers. So we don't want to be blind followers when it comes to a cult or a religion, but we need to treat culture with the same care and awareness. Oh, there we go. There's a new friend I've made recently on Instagram. Good, balanced, pantheistic person, I think. You're a pantheist, right? That's something we didn't get too deep into on the last podcast, but we can here because we're shooting. What we did kind of mention in the podcast with JC and I earlier is that that I feel like there's a problem, today in society, that we have really left-brain people that are discerning, scientifically minded people. And then we have really like open-minded, potentially even in the extreme degrees, naive, spiritual people. And then you have agnostic people in the middle. And you end up with a lot of intelligent, often educated agnostic people that don't want to identify as an atheist, and they don't want to identify as a religious person because they're not religious in any sense. but they're not willing to or ready to accept right off the bat that there is no higher being or higher self or higher power. And this is a problem I want to address because I don't see anyone talking about this. Even the big names on the atheistic side that I love, like Sam Harris. I mean, and Jordan Peterson doesn't really talk about it. Of course, Lawrence Krauss and Richard Dawkins and all these guys, no one brings it up, but everybody's really quick to attack religion from the scientific side and vice versa. But you have this huge group of well-balanced individuals on the agnostic thread in the middle, which is what you want, a balance between left and right, between discernment and open-mindedness, and acceptance versus skepticism. Postmodern skeptics. Yeah, I think that's fair. The postmodern term, to me, I get worried sometimes, not because I have a problem with it, because I'm pretty open to people using whatever terminology they like. But another part of what I talk about a lot is that we have to be careful with the words and not get too wrapped up in labels, because other people may not have the same sort of definitions wrapped up in, or the really key terms that define a certain term may not be agreeable to everybody who wants to use that word. Like I have a guy that I follow. I consider myself an atheist. Most people would not. That wouldn't tell you much about me, because most people don't understand that. And what I was getting to is that there's not just atheism and theism. There's atheism, there's theism, agnosticism, deism, pandeism, pantheism, there's animism. There's all these different ways of believing. There's all kinds of different belief systems a person can have. But technically, if you don't believe in a higher power that intercedes essentially what I call the man on the cloud model, then you are an atheist, because that's a theistic entity that you believe in. And I think that the problem that we have in our scientific community, reaching out and bridging the gap to between the scientific community itself and the thinkers and followers in society who may not be scientists themselves, but they're interested in science. They follow NASA on social media, and they're interested in documentaries about the universe. Is that people think you have to either be scientific or be religious, and you can very much be both. Carl Sagan was known to have spoken very highly of the Hindu religion and said some very specific things about its views on cosmogenesis, which I think is a beautiful, important fact to acknowledge. So, it kind of got off on the pantheism, pandeism, and all that stuff. But what I started out talking about was culture, and how culture is not something that we should just take for granted, that we have to be a part of, or that we have to. It's not a value set that we have to subscribe to or attempt to fulfill in our lives. And when you look at what a cult does and what a cult believes, you can start making determinations about the application of that belief system or that group philosophy in your life. So if you were to define our modern culture today, obviously we have lots of subcultures within our modern culture, but if you were to write out a system of values, or if you were to pick, 10 values of our culture today, there may have been studies done on this. I don't know. Somebody could tell me if you know of any. Excuse me. But if you were to write all these things out, would the definition of that, the terms that you wrote down, the values that you wrote down, would those reflect a group that you wanted to be a part of if it were a cult? Like if this were a cult, a Kim Kardashian cult, would you want to join a Kim Kardashian cult? Right? You followed her on Instagram, and you bought her apps, and you watched her show, and you commented on her forums. Like, is that a cult? You thought about her during the day and meditated, And yeah, I mean, a cultism is cult. But we sort of just we allow religious cults to exist, and we allow culture to exist, which is just I guess the most popular cult. I mean, I guess that's what your culture really is. Let's see what we're saying here. They reflect what we are ourselves believe to be the ideal. Yeah. Yeah. That's they reflect what we ourselves believe to be the ideal. So think about that. How dangerous is that? What we ourselves believe to be the ideal. So even using the word "we" there, obviously from a philosophical standpoint, it's hard not to use that word, and I understand what you mean in the general sense, but the use of the word we there is the active term for me, because they reflect what some people in society themselves believe to be the ideal. That's what cultural values do. But when we impart the use of that word we sort of put out there into the universe that we are in some way complicit in this maintaining of these cultural values that are not aligned with our own natural values. And it's this sort of blind acceptance of our situation that is the reason for my whole discussion here, is that we see culture and we're like, yeah, culture is what it is, and but to understand that we are apart from this if we choose to be, that we are no more a part of our own culture, although we may become victim or subject to it. We can step outside of the culture by recognizing that it is a cult. It's a culture that we can sort of create our entire. Sorry, I'm over here reading. I'm bad about this. I read what you guys are saying because it matters to me, and I get sidetracked. Yep, we push the okay. So what we've got here is Scientia Poetica says, well, that's why there are collective wholes. We push holes as in WH. We push the ideals through that outlet. Yeah, that's it. So my main goal here is that I put that video up the other day, I think yesterday, and I'm really happy with it. I love sharing that with you guys, and it was just sort of I guess you could call it a promo video, but it wasn't. I didn't feel like it was a promo video, but it was just explaining in 60 seconds for Instagram what this shamanic philosophy community is about. And of course, I couldn't do a great job in 60 seconds, but when it was reposted on another feed over at Project Knowledge, Lucas over there put it up for me, which was super nice of him. And there were people that made claims about this video, and that this was a cult in some way, like a cult, which is funny to me because I thought we were a social media community, and sort of just a global tribe of people that wanted to spread love. But it made me realize that, what is a cult? If someone says it's a cult, and if I'm to argue that, I realize that every social media community out there is a cult. Then, every movement of people or group of people or forum group, if you're a member of any race car forums or something, that's a cult. They had cattle cults. They still have cattle cults in Africa now. And it's just people who have a certain way of life. And it made me think about like paganism. Like they were cults too, but they were mainly tribes that were holistically connected in most of their ways of life. But just made me realize how thankful I am to have a community that, number one, shares enough of our own values that someone could even make the accusation that we have a cult, when what we really are is like 5,500 people just spreading positivity on the internet. But in our culture, that is what you would call a cult. And I guess that's the point, is that we live in a culture, a group of cults, in which our group is one that would be called a cult. Because a cult is a group, and culture is your entire group of cults within a society. And if you listen to Terence McKenna or a lot of great philosophers, any philosopher you can think of pretty much, the way that culture is described, if you find yourself on the outside of that culture, i.e. being accused of being part of a cult, for instance, if you find yourself outside the values or the norms of culture, you're probably on the right track. So that was all I had for the day. JC and I already put a podcast together. I'm not sure how much that'll end up being, maybe a 30-minute podcast or something like that. So you guys go check it out. Go check out the YouTube channel. And of course, thank you guys so much for being a part of the Instagram community. I love doing these live feeds with you guys. And we got the one we did today. So we did this on culture, and we did the one earlier on, I don't remember what else. We were kind of all over the place. But I've got an ancient civilizations one coming up because I dropped the ball and didn't record the one last week that we did on Insta Live, which was so much fun. But I'm going to do one on ancient civilizations, and then we have one on mythology coming up, and I've got some interviews on the way as well. So make sure you guys are watching for all that stuff. And for anybody that didn't hear, Sam Harris is in town March 3rd, I think, and if you're in the Dallas area. I mentioned that on the other podcast. So Sam Harris is in town. If you're in Dallas, March 3rd. And if you're not familiar with Sam Harris, you might want to go look him up, because maybe he's coming to your town if you're not in Dallas. So if you are, maybe I'll see you there. That's all I got for the day. Thank you guys so much. May the light be upon you. May life be within you. And may you be a sun on the paths of all men. God bless you guys. I love you so much. Y'all have an awesome week.